There are moments when even the smallest choices begin to feel unusually heavy. A simple question appears in front of you, yet instead of clarity, a quiet tension rises. It might be something ordinary, like selecting a meal or deciding when to respond to a message. Objectively, the outcome carries little consequence. Internally, however, your system reacts as if more is at stake. Time stretches while you weigh possibilities. Different outcomes circle through your thoughts, each one examined for hidden risk. By the time a decision is made, a subtle fatigue has already settled in. This experience can feel disproportionate. You understand that the choice is minor, and still it seems to demand more energy than it should. The weight does not come from the decision itself. It comes from the state of the mind that must carry it. When your attention is already divided across unfinished tasks, lingering conversations, and background worries, new choices do not arrive on empty ground. They land on a surface that is already crowded. Cognitive load changes perception. A light object placed on an overloaded shelf can feel unstable. In the same way, a simple decision added to a tired mind can feel complex. Mental fatigue reduces flexibility. Flexibility allows thought to move with ease between options. Without that ease, the mind searches for certainty instead of sufficiency. Certainty feels safer, yet it requires more effort. As effort increases, hesitation follows. Hesitation then reinforces the feeling that something important must be decided perfectly. And perfection quietly amplifies the weight of what was once simple. When the mind is overloaded, it begins to treat ordinary choices as signals of potential threat. This does not mean you are dramatic or incapable. It means your system is already working near its limit. Decision-making requires mental energy. It asks the brain to compare outcomes, predict consequences, and tolerate uncertainty. When energy is abundant, this process feels smooth. When energy is low, the same process feels strained. An overloaded mind prefers clarity. Ambiguity feels uncomfortable because it demands additional processing. Even a small question can trigger a search for the safest possible answer. That search can expand far beyond what the situation requires. Past experiences may quietly enter the evaluation. Old mistakes may be remembered more vividly than successes. The mind begins to calculate how to avoid regret. Regret is not actually present in the moment. It is imagined in advance. Imagined outcomes can feel emotionally real. The body responds to that imagination with tension. Muscles tighten slightly. Breathing becomes shallower. Attention narrows around the need to choose correctly. Under pressure, the brain shifts toward caution. Caution slows movement. Slower movement increases awareness of risk. Awareness of risk adds more weight to the decision. The cycle reinforces itself without you intending it to. None of this suggests weakness. It reflects a system trying to conserve stability. When the mind senses overload, it seeks control. Control feels safer than uncertainty. Yet control requires effort, and effort makes the smallest decisions feel heavier than they truly are. As mental load increases, the threshold for discomfort becomes lower. What once felt neutral can begin to feel urgent. A choice that used to take seconds may now take minutes. The added time is not laziness. It reflects the mind scanning for hidden variables. An overloaded system tries to prevent future strain by anticipating every possible outcome. Anticipation can be useful in moderation. Under fatigue, it becomes excessive. The brain starts filling gaps with imagined complications. Possibilities expand beyond what the moment requires. This expansion consumes energy. Energy that might have been used for clarity is instead used for protection. Protection is instinctive. The mind prefers avoiding mistakes over moving quickly. In a rested state, uncertainty feels manageable. In an exhausted state, uncertainty feels threatening. When uncertainty feels threatening, even minor choices seem to carry emotional risk. Emotional risk is heavier than practical risk. The body reacts as though the decision could affect safety or belonging. Belonging matters deeply to the human nervous system. The possibility of disapproval, even imagined, can amplify hesitation. As hesitation grows, confidence quietly shrinks. Shrinking confidence makes the next decision feel even harder. This is not a flaw in character. It is a feedback loop created by overload. Reducing the weight of small decisions begins not with forcing speed, but with restoring capacity. Capacity allows flexibility. Flexibility allows acceptance of imperfection, and acceptance lightens what once felt heavy. Another layer of weight comes from the desire to choose correctly. When the mind is tired, it becomes less tolerant of error. Mistakes feel more costly than they actually are. This is not because the decision is important. It is because your system has less energy to recover from regret. Regret requires processing. Processing requires capacity. If capacity feels low, the mind attempts to prevent discomfort in advance. Prevention becomes the priority. Even when the stakes are small, the emotional impact feels magnified. A simple choice can begin to represent competence. It can feel like proof of intelligence or evidence of failure. This interpretation rarely happens consciously. It unfolds quietly beneath awareness. Perfection begins to appear safer than sufficiency. Sufficiency feels uncertain. Uncertainty feels unstable when your mental reserves are thin. As a result, You may find yourself double-checking options that do not need double-checking. You may compare possibilities long after clarity was available. Comparison drains attention. Attention that is drained makes the next decision heavier. The cycle is subtle. The mind attempts to reduce future discomfort, yet in doing so, it increases present strain. Choosing becomes less about the option itself and more about protecting your sense of stability. When stability feels fragile, small decisions carry symbolic weight. They appear larger than they are because they are carrying more meaning than they were meant to hold. Restoring proportion begins with restoring mental space. With space, the decision can return to its actual size. And when it returns to its true size, the heaviness softens naturally. At times, the weight of a small decision is shaped less by the present and more by what came before. An overloaded mind quietly carries impressions from earlier choices. Experiences that ended in discomfort tend to leave a stronger trace than those that passed without consequence. The brain is designed to remember what hurt. It does this to protect you. When a new option appears, your system does not evaluate it in isolation. It searches for resemblance. It asks whether this moment echoes a previous mistake or an awkward outcome. The comparison can happen quickly, almost beneath awareness, yet it shifts how the situation feels. A simple decision gains emotional texture. That texture makes the choice appear more significant than it objectively is. This reaction is not irrational. It is protective. Your mind prefers preventing regret over moving swiftly. When mental capacity is already stretched, that protective instinct becomes stronger. Instead of weighing only the current facts, your system adds layers from memory. Memory adds meaning. Meaning adds intensity. Intensity increases hesitation. Hesitation can feel responsible because it signals care. However, extended caution requires energy. When energy is limited, the effort to avoid discomfort makes the task feel heavier. The heaviness does not come from the decision alone. It comes from accumulated experience influencing the present moment. Recognizing this influence allows you to separate past discomfort from current reality. The option in front of you may not deserve the same level of vigilance as something that once caused pain. When the past loosens its grip on the present, proportion returns. And with proportion, even small decisions regain their lightness. Another reason small decisions feel heavy is that the mind confuses choice with consequence. When mental energy is low, even ordinary options begin to appear permanent. You might sense that selecting one path quietly closes another. That perception creates pressure. Pressure narrows attention. Narrowed attention exaggerates risk. The exaggeration is subtle. It does not announce itself as fear. It shows up as overanalysis. An ordinary decision slowly becomes symbolic. Instead of choosing between two simple options, you begin to feel as though you are shaping the future in a significant way. This interpretation increases emotional investment. Emotional investment increases tension. Tension slows clarity. As clarity slows, doubt expands. Doubt then reinforces the belief that more thinking is required. The mind believes it is being careful. In reality, it is responding to fatigue. When cognitive resources are stretched thin, flexibility decreases. Without flexibility, it becomes harder to accept that most outcomes are adjustable. The brain prefers certainty when energy is limited. Certainty, however, is rarely available in everyday choices. The gap between desired certainty and actual uncertainty creates discomfort. That discomfort is misread as importance. Importance adds weight. Weight increases hesitation. Hesitation consumes more energy. Energy depletion then makes the next decision feel heavier still. Breaking this cycle does not require forcing quick answers. It begins with recognizing that the perceived permanence of small choices is often an illusion created by overload. When capacity gradually returns, proportion returns with it. And when proportion returns, decisions regain their ordinary size. Overload does not only affect thinking, it changes how the body participates in decision-making. When mental resources are stretched, the nervous system remains slightly alert. That alertness creates a background tension that is easy to overlook. In a rested state, the body feels neutral while choosing. In a fatigued state, the body feels engaged as if something important is unfolding. A small decision can then trigger subtle physical reactions. Breathing shortens, muscles hold lightly. The stomach tightens without clear reason. These reactions are not dramatic, yet they influence perception. Physical tension signals to the brain that caution is required. The brain responds by increasing analysis. Increased analysis slows movement. Slower movement reinforces the sense that the choice carries weight. What began as a minor option now feels layered with consequence. The body and mind begin to amplify each other. Alertness feeds thought. Thought feeds alertness. This loop happens quietly. You may only notice the fatigue that follows. Because the process feels internal, it can be mistaken for indecisiveness. In reality, your system is attempting to maintain stability under strain. When the nervous system senses limited energy, it becomes conservative. Conservatism favors safety over speed. Safety feels important. Importance feels heavy. The heaviness is therefore not about weakness. It is about a body that has not fully recovered. When recovery is gradual, tension softens. As tension softens, perception changes. The same decision that once felt weighted begins to feel manageable again. There is also a quieter factor that adds weight to small decisions. An overloaded mind begins to question its own judgment. When fatigue lingers, confidence does not feel steady. Even familiar choices can trigger subtle doubt. Doubt does not always appear as fear. It often appears as hesitation that feels responsible. The mind suggests that a little more thinking might prevent future regret. Additional thinking seems reasonable. Reasonable thinking gradually turns into overprocessing. Overprocessing consumes attention. As attention narrows, perspective shrinks. Without perspective, minor trade-offs feel amplified. You may begin to wonder whether one option reflects something about you. A simple preference can start to feel like a statement about identity. That interpretation increases emotional involvement. Emotional involvement raises the stakes internally. When the stakes feel high, even small uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Uncomfortable uncertainty slows momentum. Slowed momentum reinforces the sense that something significant is at risk. This pattern builds quietly. Nothing dramatic occurs on the outside. Inside, however, the mind is working hard to maintain coherence. Coherence feels necessary when mental clarity feels thin. The effort to protect coherence increases pressure. Pressure reduces ease. Reduced ease makes the choice feel heavier than its actual impact. Recognizing this pattern restores proportion. A decision about a meal or a reply is rarely a decision about identity. When identity is separated from preference, tension decreases. And as tension decreases, the weight of the choice returns to its true scale. Another layer often hides beneath the surface of hesitation. When your mind has been stretched for days or weeks, it begins to conserve energy in subtle ways. Conservation does not always look like rest. Sometimes it looks like resistance. A small decision requires commitment. Commitment requires energy. Energy feels limited when mental reserves are low. Because reserves feel uncertain, the brain slows the process. Slowing creates the illusion that the decision itself is complicated. In reality, the complication often reflects fatigue rather than complexity. Fatigue changes perception. Options that once felt neutral begin to carry emotional weight. Even a harmless preference can seem risky when clarity feels thin. Risk feels larger when the nervous system is already tense. Tension narrows tolerance for ambiguity. With less tolerance, the mind tries to predict outcomes more precisely. Prediction requires imagination. Imagination can wander into unlikely scenarios. Unlikely scenarios still trigger subtle stress responses. Stress responses make the body slightly alert. Alertness reinforces the sense that something important is happening. Importance increases perceived pressure. Perceived pressure slows choice even further. This loop feels personal. It can seem as though you have lost decisiveness. In truth, the system is responding to strain. Strain magnifies ordinary demands. When the nervous system settles, ordinary choices regain their lightness. The weight was never in the decision itself. It was in the state of the mind that had to carry it. Sometimes the weight of small decisions comes from accumulated unfinished thoughts. When many things remain open in your mind, each new choice feels as though it must compete for limited space. An open mental loop quietly consumes attention. Several open loops create background noise. In that environment, even a simple decision enters a crowded room. Crowded rooms reduce clarity. Reduced clarity increases effort. Effort makes the task feel larger than it is. This effect often goes unnoticed because the individual decision looks ordinary from the outside. Inside, however, it lands on an already busy surface. A busy surface absorbs less easily. When absorption is difficult, friction appears. Friction is interpreted as difficulty. Difficulty signals importance. Importance brings caution. Caution slows movement. Slower movement reinforces the belief that careful analysis is required. Careful analysis consumes more mental energy. Energy depletion then intensifies the original strain. The cycle is subtle, but persistent. It does not announce itself as overload. It simply makes small choices feel heavier than expected. Clearing mental space does not require solving everything at once. It begins with acknowledging that some weight belongs to accumulated unfinished thoughts rather than the present decision. When that distinction becomes visible, pressure softens. The choice remains. The excess weight begins to lift. There is also a subtle emotional layer beneath hesitation. When the mind is overloaded, tolerance for regret becomes smaller. Regret feels heavier when energy feels scarce. Because of this, even minor outcomes can seem threatening. The brain begins to treat small preferences as if they carry lasting consequences. Lasting consequences imply responsibility. Responsibility feels serious when clarity feels fragile. Fragility increases caution. Caution encourages extended analysis. Extended analysis delays resolution. Delayed resolution maintains tension. Tension amplifies the sense that something important is at stake. What makes this process difficult is that it feels logical. From the inside, you are simply trying to avoid discomfort. Avoiding discomfort appears wise. Wisdom, however, does not require perfect foresight. When mental resources are limited, foresight becomes distorted. The future begins to look less flexible than it actually is. Flexibility feels uncertain. Uncertainty increases vigilance. Vigilance consumes energy. Energy depletion reduces emotional resilience. Reduced resilience makes regret appear more painful than it would likely be. As this pattern continues, small decisions begin to carry emotional weight that does not belong to them. The weight reflects sensitivity rather than weakness. Sensitivity is a sign of care. Care is valuable. It simply needs enough mental space to remain balanced. When space slowly returns, the fear of small regret softens. And when regret feels manageable, decisions begin to feel lighter again. Another quiet influence behind heavy decisions is the relationship between choice and identity. When mental capacity feels reduced, the sense of self can feel less steady. Reduced steadiness increases the need to choose in a way that feels correct. Correctness begins to mean alignment with the person you believe you are trying to be. That image may include being thoughtful, reliable, attentive, or fair. Under normal conditions, alignment happens with little effort. When clarity is strained, alignment feels uncertain, and uncertainty introduces hesitation. Hesitation invites additional checking, and checking consumes more attention than the moment truly requires. As attention narrows, the decision begins to appear symbolic rather than practical. Symbolic meaning gives the impression that something deeper is being measured. When something feels connected to identity, it rarely feels small. Identity carries history, memory, and personal standards. Because of this, even minor preferences can feel tied to character. This connection is not a weakness. It reflects how closely values and actions are woven together. When energy is available, that weaving feels natural and steady. When energy is low, the same process can feel demanding and fragile. The mind then tries to confirm alignment repeatedly, hoping to avoid missteps. Repeated confirmation adds weight where simplicity once existed. With enough internal space, identity does not need constant reassurance. Choices return to their practical size, and the self remains intact without excessive scrutiny. As steadiness returns, decisions gradually feel lighter again. As the mind gradually regains space, the scale of decisions begins to shift. What once felt urgent starts to appear manageable. The choice itself may not have changed, yet the internal pressure around it softens. Pressure often comes from accumulated strain rather than from the present moment. When that strain loosens, perception adjusts naturally. It becomes easier to see that most small decisions do not define character or determine long-term outcomes. They simply move the day forward in modest ways. Moving forward in modest ways is enough. The mind does not need certainty to function. It needs sufficient steadiness. Steadiness grows when you allow a decision to exist without attaching it to identity or future consequences. Allowing does not mean indifference. It means recognizing proportion. Proportion restores balance between thought and action. With balance restored, hesitation shortens. Shorter hesitation conserves energy. Energy conservation strengthens resilience. Resilience reduces the fear of minor regret. When regret feels tolerable, the mind no longer treats small choices as threats. They return to their appropriate size. Appropriate size brings relief without drama. Relief does not need celebration. It simply feels like breathing without resistance. In that quieter state, decisions become movements rather than burdens, and movement, when it is light, feels natural again.